Hello, everyone. Welcome to this roundtable around RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. My name is Nech. I am a senior machine learning engineer at Algolia, and I'm very excited to bring a few experts on this table for you today. We're going to start with Alessandro Benedetti, who's an R&D software engineer and director at Sease. He's an Apache Lucene and Solar committer, a member of Solar PMC, and a long engagement in the open source community. My second guest is Pierre Peigné, Chief Science Officer at PRISM Eval, also with a long experience in working with AI technologies, finding their weaknesses, and finding defenses against potential attackers. And we're going to discuss RAG, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation, a hot topic these days to generate content that is based on actual data. But first of all, why are we talking about RAG? Why should you care about Retrieval Augmented Generation? I'm going to turn first to Alessandro Benedetti. What do you think, Alessandro, makes this new technology unique?
The main point of Retrieval Augmented Generation is to give to users the ability to speak, to talk with your documents. So effectively, you can interact with your corpus of information with natural language and engage with your content, discuss with it, get information out of it. And this unique way of expressing the user information need and interaction, I think makes Retrieval Augmented Generation incredibly interesting and unique. We've been working into this direction for many years with natural language processing techniques and information retrieval. With Retrieval Augmented Generation, we got it suddenly to a level which is really promising.
Interesting. So it's really the interaction mode and the possibilities that make it important for you. Turning to you, Pierre, why do you think RAG is interesting?
Well, I think that from my perspective on security and safety of GenAI application, I think RAG tends to add two interesting new points into the application. The first one is related to the surface of attack, because RAGs tend to both create new potential vulnerabilities, but also ways to potentially mitigate some attack. And on the other end, it also creates a new kind of target specific threat to any kind of LLM application, because, for instance, once you have a RAG system which is plugged on your own knowledge database, well, as an attacker, I can try to make data leaks out of it. It could be private data from your user, private data from your company, any kind of intellectual property could be leaked out of RAG system, which is not really the case if you do not have access to this knowledge base.
Interesting. So what brings most of the value that Alessandro introduced, which is chat to your knowledge base, is also the biggest danger about RAG, which is that you might not give anymore the right access controls on top of your precious data. But those considerations, having natural language interactions with the data at hand, protecting this data against unwanted guests, these problems have been here since decades in computer science. Turning back to you, Alessandro, why do we focus on RAG now? What makes 2024 the year of RAG and not, say, 2016? You mentioned natural language interactions. Since 2016 and the Alexa craze, there was a lot of hype around natural language as an interaction mode. So why is RAG happening now?
I think the main point we need to make in history that separate like sort of pre-RAG and after RAG, I would say, is the release of ChatGPT. So when OpenAI released this product, there was like a huge difference in accessing and using large language models. It became something for everybody. So anybody could like log into the web page of ChatGPT and interact, ask questions, and get back like to a very good level of quality responses in natural language and knowledge. So it was really a huge difference with what we've been seeing before, like as you said, with Alexa, Cortana, Siri, that have been there for many years. But to be honest, as products, they were never to that level of quality, or at least perceived quality, which is anyway what's probably more important even. And at that point, we got like a massive increase in users basically working with information retrieval tasks. So we got like many people that previously were just using probably search engines, web search engines such as Google, to differentiate in a keyword like based approach. They changed the way they interacted with internet, effectively, with knowledge. And the quality of ChatGPT and the release in 2022, in my opinion, made a huge difference. So people started experimenting, and then Retrieval Augmented Generation happened.
Okay, very interesting. So for you, it's also the critical mass of users that makes this technology worth investing into. We're at a position where people are being trained, after having been trained for decades to speak in keywords to our search engine. Google is now training users back to speak in natural language, to ask actual questions. And this means there is opportunity and untapped potential for many businesses, including you in the audience, to leverage the training big brands are doing on users, so that you also can capture the value of those more subtle queries, more personalized queries, more individual requests. How about you, Pierre? Would you say that on the security and on the impact potential of these technologies, it is also the user adoption that makes 2024 the right year for thinking about securing RAG applications? Or do you see other ingredients that made this a hot security topic now rather than before?
I think now it becomes really critical to have secured LLM application precisely because of RAGs. I think that in some sense, before introducing RAGs as new type of LLM application, most of the problem you could have if you were a company and you were deploying a chatbot without RAGs were public relationship problems.
Yes.
In some sense, no one wants to have a chatbot producing a hateful speech or very harmful output, but in some sense, it's kind of what you can get if you jailbreak a system. That's it. However,
Yeah,
if you introduce private data, it becomes a lot different. Now it's like your database, your customers, all of this, where you are legally supposed to have a very strong commitment to their security to the privacy of this data. All of this came into the play.
So it's also the regulatory environment where
Yes.
now people are responsible for the personal data they store. If you return my personal data to a chatbot interaction with Alessandro, there might be grounds for liability.
Exactly.
This means investment is needed. Interesting. And so what brought you, Pierre, personally to working on LLM applications and RAG in particular? Is this impact potential, or is this something else?
Well, this is a nice question. I think that, so first, my expertise is more on specific LLM application, which are consumer-facing application, because this is where most of the danger from jailbreak comes. However, I'm very interested by RAGs because we have a lot of different type of extremely strange ways to jailbreak them through what is called usually indirect prompt injection. I can try to poison your database. I can try to just put a jailbreak on the internet. If your RAG system can not only query on the database, but also make requests out of it and just access to the internet, I can just poison your system. And so from a security perspective, it's very interesting to discover how those vulnerability can be leveraged and how we can mitigate them. And back to your first question, well, I think that currently, in terms of AI, generative AIs are the most powerful tool we have. Those are the closer things to general purpose AIs, even though we still have a lot of progress to do on this side. And because of this, I really think it's very important to make sure those systems are both safe and robust because of the the fact that you can use them for a lot of purpose. They are toward generality, even though it's not the case now. While if you have just a tool AI, it's much easier to secure and less dangerous potentially.
Okay, very interesting. Like they say in security, a chain is as solid as the weakest link, and there are
Exactly.
so many links in a RAG system. As you said, it's very generic. It can do so many things. So you just need one to be something you can abuse to actually get inside the security perimeter. I see how this can be fascinating for a security researcher, especially with some pen test interest. Turning to you, Alessandro, you come from a very different background. You have less a focus on security, but I would say rather on information retrieval. I mean, a solar commuter, do I need to say more? Your focus has always been on search systems. Yet, when we look at your profile today, we see that you took a steep turn focusing on RAG, thinking that this might be the best use of your skills in this current period. What brought you personally to this area, rather than other interesting dimensions of information retrieval, which is still a very bustling field? Why do you think RAG is the most interesting thing you can be working on in 2024?
So for me, it's been, first of all, a natural progression. So I started integrating machine learning with search engines and information retrieval systems since 2013, with first like natural language processing solutions to do name entity recognition and linking. Then I progressed with learning to rank. So in 2015, more or less, we started experimenting in integrating machine learning to improve the ranking of search results in a search engine. And then we fast forward to 2018, we got probably the first large language model, which we can probably say BERT was like groundbreaking, because it moved from what initially was like word-to-vec approaches, where you were encoding single terms into like a vector kind of way to represent the meaning of them, into doing the same for sentences and bigger length of text. So at that point, it was a natural progression to move from what was large in 2018 to what was large language modeling in 2022, 23, and 24. And with ChatGPT products and the large language models behind, I started seeing like additional ways of encoding the meaning of text in not only vectors potentially, but in this sort of instruction-based systems that give you the possibility of interacting with a sort of agent that behind the scenes has access to initially just a pre-trained knowledge base, and with Retrieval Augmented Generation, an extended knowledge base where you can pass only what you care about, so your domain, for example, of information, pre-filtered information, pre-processed, and basically you can enrich your information retrieval system to a level of natural language interaction that wasn't possible before. So I still do, of course, a lot of information retrieval, because that's, to be honest, the base of any Retrieval Augmented Generation system. But yeah, for me, it's been a natural progression. So it's like slowly better and better and better in doing what we wanted to do since, 2013.
Nice. This is a rich perspective, because many people will frame RAG as a change of paradigm, a groundbreaking new way to interact with whatever data and with whatever businesses. But you would beg to disagree and say that this is actually the logical next step in a direction where we always try to match the user need, the query, the request, with the perfect gold response that we could give, given what we know, given what we can compute, given what we can predict. Even a general keyword search system today is only mature if it has some understanding of your context, some personalization ability, maybe automatic handling of synonyms as other users will interact with the system. We now expect so many things from a modern information retrieval system that it's not so far from what today assistants look like in terms of user experience. But then you say it's a natural progression, but you also mentioned that this new system, new interaction unlocks possibilities in natural language interactions that we didn't have before. So according to you, Alessandro, how would you say a RAG system is different from previous applications and from previous natural language interaction modes? what do you see as unique opportunities, but maybe also unique risks of chatting with your data on these kind of applications?
So the main difference, first of all, is that we have now what are called large language models. So a large language model has a comprehension of patterns of languages, which is vastly different from what was considered even large back in 2018, for example, with BERT. So the main difference is that basically there is like a high level of skill for these language models to represent knowledge, to aggregate knowledge, and formulate something that sounds a lot more human than like previous systems. So in my opinion, it's extremely useful to use large language models to formulate answers that can be understood by any level of tech-savvy people. So you don't need, I mean, previously probably there were like a certain amount of people that were able to interact with these systems and get back the value out of them. And now with Retrieval Augmented Generation, we can probably meet many more people that maybe were not that confident in using such technologies before.
Interesting. We are meeting users where they are now, instead of expecting them to come to us and understand our own idiom and language. That's lovely because, as you mentioned it, it's all about the semantics. It's about what the users really mean. If I ask you for a club, is it a club sandwich? Is it a golf club? If you're able to understand my meaning, you can serve me better as a system for me and my human needs. So I like this perspective also because this is something you don't hear often. In the Alexa and voice ecosystem, everybody was talking about accessibility, how it allows my grandpa, who never interacted with a computer in the last 20 years, now has a voice speaker at home that he can ask questions and get internet answers from. It's amazing. He's almost blind, and yet he can interact with our technologies. But this is something we don't hear as often as we should about RAG, that this allows businesses to serve underserved communities, people with disabilities, people that are less tech-savvy than the technology builders. And so RAG is not just a way to unlock new potential for businesses. It's also a way to bring technology to a broader audience and to bring your services and businesses to people that could benefit from it, that were on the side of the train to the future until now. Turning to you, Pierre, how do you see, because likewise, you say this has bigger risks because of a bigger attack surface. We are today with systems that can do general things, from summarizing a document to giving me an apple pie recipe, and this opens to a lot of exploitation. Do you see also new unique opportunities from RAG systems? Would you say that this is something that needs more defenses mostly? Or would you say that there is also untapped potential to look at that this approach unlocks?
So, well, I would answer both because first, I would say that currently you increase the vulnerability if you have a RAG, especially because you have levels of this, especially depending on which type of access to data your RAG have. I mentioned earlier that if you have a knowledge base which is kind of enclosed, you just have to make sure that what is within this knowledge base is not poisoned or corrupted with any kind of jailbreak, and you are kind of fine. However, from the data poisoning perspective, not from the data leak I mentioned. However, if your system has access to tools which allows to query specific database, query specific website, or even query the internet with unrestricted access, then you have a lot of things you can do which can completely hijack your system, and it's very hard to prevent
all the
because
risks.
it's too big. However, I also think that you can use RAG actually to help because, for instance, it's RAG allows information to be recovered out of your system. So you can imagine using RAGs to make specific warnings about how to behave, becoming more prominent in specific scenarios, which could sometimes be enough to avoid your system being hijacked. Because one thing which is still great with those AIs is that most of the time, it's much harder to get them off track than back on track. It's you just need a very small nudge to just get them getting to harmless behavior.
Nice, very interesting. So you seem to think that in general, sure, there are more risks and companies should not deploy RAG mindlessly and carelessly, but you still think that there are opportunities for user interactions that make it worth the case. As with everything in security, we would not secure systems if they were not worth it. And two, there are opportunities to use RAG itself as a system for improving your security at scale, for reviewing what data gets out, for even just, I would imagine comparing the answers by your chatbots with documents in your knowledge base can tell you if some documents that should stay confidential are getting leaked. There are ways to automate checking the data security levels and how close it gets to what you're returning.
Yes.
And this might be indeed the right time to ask you, as we're getting closer to the final part of this panel. I want our audience to get away with this nice understanding of the general context and why RAG matters, but also with some concrete tips that can help them start their journey in making the benefits from RAG and in capturing the value that it can bring to your company. So maybe first with you, Pierre. Let's talk a bit tooling. What's a useful framework, software, system that you use for building RAG, which you would like to share?
Well, I think that in some sense, I would currently, I would suggest to try to use a Swiss cheese approach to security, because none of the solution for securing system works perfectly. So ideally, you want filters, but filters are not enough. So just don't trust any tool independently to be sufficient, because all of them can be bypassed. So more as a mental model, I would suggest stack security things, because you reduce a lot the chance of just getting hijacked. And in addition to this, the more steps you had, the harder it becomes for an attacker to, because the attacker has a black box access to your system. So if there is 20 steps before getting an output, it's kind of harder for me to find a way to just go through all of them until completion. So first, I would say Swiss cheese approach. And second, and I'm kind of doing a small advertisements for my company, I think that actually, if you want to secure your system, you have to be extremely careful about the fact that testing your system using static benchmark is not enough. Static benchmarks give you some proxy about how your system will behave against those specific prompts, but nothing about what will happen if you have a super strong and committed adversary trying to hijack your system with very bad target in mind. So if you have a customer facing application, just reach us. It's probably better for you to have a talk with us before deploying anyway.
Thank you, Pierre, for this. And now you mentioned it, I remember the Swiss cheese model of security on LLMs, because you mentioned it on a blog post on Algolia that you've been working on with one of my colleagues. That's the ultimate guide on prompt injection, and that will guide you through the different steps to implementing layers to your Swiss cheese security model, ensuring that there's less and less risks of abuse. So thank you for that, Pierre, and I'm sure interested audience will be able to check out that blog post. Turning to you, Alessandro, as a last question for you, what are useful frameworks, softwares, or like Pierre shared, mental models that you think would benefit mod people who are interested in RAG?
So I will start from the obvious open source players, such as LangChain and Haystack. They were born to interact with large language models. They have a huge community. There's a lot of activity. And especially Haystack was born to effectively build RAG implementations. So you will have compatibility with many different large language models, with many different retrieval systems. So that's something that, to be honest, anybody that wants to work with Retrieval Augmented Generation should take a look. And then I would like to mention another framework called the SPY from Stanford, which is quite promising because attempt to solve the problem of interaction with large language model in terms of prompt engineering. So at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty in how you can program a specific model, right? So how can I get back from the large language model specifically what I want? How should I formulate the instructions in the way that I get something very well defined and deterministic from the large language model? It's still a challenge, of course. It's an open challenge. The SPY is trying to solve it, and it's quite promising. We started using it in some proof of concept and in some projects. So I would pay some attention to what they do in the next few months.
Nice. Thank you for the tip. And this is a good reminder to conclude our roundtable, to learn from the others, look at open source technologies, read blog posts from the people that are building these systems. We're building in the open, and we should learn together from each other. Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you, Pierre. This was very insightful. I hope that your audience found it interesting, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this DevCon. See you soon, guys. Have a good time.